I had spent weeks imagining how my 34th birthday would unfold. The private room at Alinea glowed with low light, the champagne chilled to perfection, and the dress I wore felt like an affirmation of every long night I had worked to get here. Cream silk, clean lines, crystals that caught the flicker of candles. This was supposed to be my evening. Then, Verena leaned across the table. Her hand swept the remnants of her plate crumbled napkins, a peel of lemon rind, a smear of sauce, and dropped them into my lap as though I were a bin. She smirked, her voice carrying across the hushed room. "Now you look like a garbage can." The laughter I expected never came. My friends froze. Jasmine's fork hovered in midair. Tamsin's eyes widened. Rowan and Felix both looked as if they might intervene. Before they could. My mother spoke in that weary, indulgent tone I knew too well. "Verena's just uncomfortable with fancy places. Calla, don't take it to heart." I felt the silk cling damply to my legs, the weight of every gaze at the table pressing into my skin. My smile came automatically, trained from years of smoothing over the sharp edges my family threw at me. "It's fine," I said, though nothing about the moment was fine. Inside, something shifted, not a flash of rage, not even shame, something quieter and more final, a decision forming beneath the humiliation. I reached for my napkin, dabbing at the stain, hearing Verena's low chuckle as she leaned back in her chair. My friends remained silent, unsure whether stepping in would wound me further. I gave them the same smile I had always given, a signal that I could take it, but I no longer wanted to take it. My hand brushed the key fob in my clutch, a reminder of the sedan Sable drove every day, still legally mine in title and insurance. I had called it safety when I kept everything in my name. Tonight, the word took on a different meaning. The evening limped forward, but the balance of power in me had already begun to shift, carrying me toward what would come next. When I finally shut the door of my apartment behind me, the silence felt heavier than the murmur of the restaurant. I slipped out of the ruined silk and hung it on the back of a chair, not because it could be salvaged, but because I wanted to see the damage in the morning light. It would remind me of what I had endured. I made coffee, though it was far too late for it, sat at my desk, and opened the folder I had been building quietly for years. Every transfer, every wire, every so-called emergency lived here. Verena's voice echoed in my head. "Nat, the landlord's threatening eviction. Could you help just this one time?" One time had become 10, then 20. Phone bills, car repairs, recital fees, all slipping into my accounts as if obligation were written in my blood. Scrolling down, I saw the spa charges. The designer purse she insisted was a gift for Sable but posted proudly herself. The weekend getaways she claimed were mental health breaks. And then the sedan $32,000 of reliability, supposedly to help Sable get to school. Every gas stipend and repair invoice still drafted from my account. All of it in my name, hidden under the word safety. My mother's soft favoritism rang like background music your sister tries so hard when Verena dropped another job. Money isn't everything whenever I shared a promotion, even last year when I became executive director. Delphine sighed. "Just don't overwork yourself, sweetheart." Before turning the conversation back to Verena's big heart, I realized I had been chasing something I would never receive. Recognition, pride, even basic respect. I had tried to buy their love with tuition funds, utility checks, a birthday dinner meant to prove I belonged. The spreadsheet glowed back at me, line after line of proof. Not generosity anymore, not kindness, just a ledger of how thoroughly I had allowed myself to be diminished. And staring at those numbers, I knew it was time to close the account in more ways than one. The morning after, I reached for my phone before I even poured coffee. The first thing I saw was a notification Sable had posted new photos. I tapped, and there it was, my dress. Stained and crumpled, a blurry shot from the restaurant. The caption read, When rich auntie tries too hard. Guess the trash finally matched the outfit. Beneath it, Verina's comment glowed a string of laughing emojis. More screenshots rolled in from friends who had seen the post before I did. My phone buzzed with messages. Are you okay? Want me to come over ignore them? They're cruel. I typed out thanks but asked for space. I didn't want witnesses to the ache in my chest. Not again. I replayed the night in fragments. Not just the moment Verina dumped the scraps into my lap, but the way my mother reached for Sable's hand afterward, soothing her as though she had been the one wounded. The way Verina leaned back in her chair, triumphant, measuring her importance by the silence she forced from everyone else. The pattern stretched back years. Every award I earned, every promotion, every milestone diminished or dismissed. While Verina's stumbles were praised as effort, my achievements were smothered under warnings not to get ahead of myself. And I had accepted it, quietly handing over money, favors, and pieces of myself, hoping someday they would see me. Across the room, my gaze landed on the sedan's key fob hanging on its hook by the door. It gleamed faintly in the light, an object that seemed small but carried the weight of years of avoidance. That car was mine on paper, mine in truth. Yet in practice it had become Sable's entitlement. The photo on my phone and the key on my wall told the same story. Boundaries ignored, respect discarded. I set the phone face down on the desk, my pulse steady in a way it hadn't been last night. Something had shifted. The next move would not be theirs. It would be mine. By noon, I had stopped shaking. The photo, the captions, the comments, they no longer burned in the same way. What remained was colder, sharper, and strangely steady. Revenge would have been easy, maybe even satisfying for a moment. But what I wanted was something else. I wanted consequences. I opened my laptop and began with the credit card. Verina had been an authorized user for nearly 3 years. One phone call and a few typed commands erased her access. The representative explained the pending charges would still process, but nothing more could be added. I confirmed, my voice calm. When the call ended, I sat for a long moment in the quiet, letting the weight of it settle. Next came the recurring transfers, the quiet siphons I had set up over time, rent patches, stipends, the monthly gas money that had long since outpaced the cost of a full tank. Each click that canceled an automatic payment felt like closing a door I had left unlocked too long. Finally, I turned to the sedan. I pulled the file from my cabinet title, registration, proof of insurance all bearing my name, the loan agreement, the payments, the maintenance records, every detail documented. I scanned copies, then called a towing service near Sable's school. I explained that I was the legal owner reclaiming my vehicle. They required proof, which I emailed immediately. We set the pickup for the following morning during her dance practice. Once the logistics were in motion, I composed a single text and sent it to all three. We can talk at my apartment today at 3. No explanation, no justification. The responses came quickly. Verina first, her fury spilling through the screen. Are you insane? You can't just cut me off like this? Delphine followed with her predictable guilt. Sweetheart, families don't keep score. You're being petty. Then Sable. The car is mine. You can't just take it away. I typed only one reply, the same to each. We will discuss at 3. For the first time, the conversation wasn't happening on their terms. The clock was ticking toward my door, and I was ready. The call came exactly when I expected it. At 7:50 a.m., my phone buzzed with Sable's name flashing across the screen. I let it ring once before answering. Her voice was shrill, frantic. My car is gone. Someone stole it from the school lot while I was inside. What am I supposed to do now? I kept my tone even. It wasn't stolen. Sable. It was reclaimed. The car is mine, titled, registered, and insured in my name. I loaned it to you. That loan is over. There was a pause. Then the flood began. You can't do that. Everyone knows it's my car. I need it for school, for dance, for everything. You're ruining my life." Her voice cracked as the threats shifted into tears. "Please, Aunt Calla, I'll delete the post. I'll apologize. Just give it back." My chest tightened, but I stayed steady. "This isn't about punishment for a single post. It's about years of behavior. The car was always mine. Now it's simply back where it belongs." She hung up on me, the line dead before I could say more. Minutes later, Verina's name lit my phone. She didn't bother with greetings. "How could you do this? After everything I sacrificed for you, I raised Sable on my own while you lived in your perfect high-rise. And this is how you repay me." I waited until she ran out of breath. "Verina," I said softly, "what exactly have you sacrificed for me, Silence?" Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she muttered something about "never mind" and slammed the line shut. By 9. Delphine called. Her voice carried its usual mix of weariness and rebuke. "Sweetheart, this has gone too far. Families help each other. You know that." I closed my eyes and let the words sit before answering. "You're right. Mom, families help each other, but help without respect rots love. And that's what's happened here." She sighed heavily, trying to shift the weight of the conversation back onto me, but the words were already spoken, and they couldn't be taken back. The clock ticked closer to 3, when they would all face me in person. At 3 o'clock sharp, the knock came. I opened the door to find Verina flushed with anger, Sable sullen and puffy-eyed, and my mother wearing her martyred expression. They swept in without waiting for an invitation, carrying the storm with them. I had prepared for this moment. On my dining table lay 3 binders, each labeled and tabbed bank transfers, credit card statements, screenshots of social media posts. I gestured toward the chairs. "Sit. We need to go through this together." They hesitated, then complied. I opened the first binder. "Over the past 5 years, I've transferred to your accounts just under $48,000, most of it described as emergencies, rent, utilities, tuition, gas, but also concert tickets, spas, and weekend getaways." Verina shifted in her seat. "You make it sound like I was stealing." I didn't argue. I turned the page. The credit card. "You were an authorized user. That's over $3,000 in charges restaurants, shopping, hair appointments. As of yesterday, that access is closed." Sable scowled. "You can't just take the car, too. Everyone knows it's mine." I slid the title across the table. My name gleamed in bold print. The car was always mine. I loaned it to you. That loan is over. What remains is the education fund. It stays in trust for college, and only for college. Delphine's voice softened. "Sweetheart, you're overreacting. Families shouldn't keep track like this." I met her eyes. I never wanted to keep track. But when kindness is mocked, evidence is necessary. These aren't accusations. They're facts. The room fell silent except for the rustle of paper. They cycled through familiar tactics, minimizing, blaming, even tears. But I didn't flinch. I repeated the terms with the same calm each time, steady as the records in front of me. For once, I wasn't searching their faces for approval. I wasn't hoping they'd finally see me. I only wanted to be understood. The silence stretched until even their protests lost force, leaving the weight of numbers between us as the only truth. The silence broke with Verina's voice, sharp as glass. "You think this will hold up, I'll take you to small claims court. You gave Sable that car, and everyone knows it." I slid the title back toward her, my tone even. "The law recognizes ownership, not hearsay. My name is on the papers. Any court would see that." Sable leaned forward, fury shaking her voice. "Then I'll expose you online. Everyone will know what kind of person you are, humiliating your own family for attention." I held her gaze. "Every post you make can be documented. Every lie leaves a trail. If you want your friends to know you lost a car you never owned, that's your choice, but I won't be shamed into silence." Delphine clasped her hands together, her eyes pleading. "Enough of this. Just apologize to one another so we can move on. That's what families do." My chest ached, but I kept my voice steady. "An apology that comes with conditions isn't real. You want me to forget what happened so the money flows again. That's not reconciliation. That's transaction." Verena slammed her hand on the table. "You don't get it. You left home, and I was stuck with Mom. You think you've suffered, but I carried the weight you walked away from." The words hit differently, a raw admission slipping past her anger. I leaned forward. "I left to survive. You learned to survive by leaning on me. Neither of us got what we needed, but we're old enough to face it now." I slid a folder across the table. "Here's a budget template. Here's a hiring contact in the city. And Sable. The education fund is still yours when you enroll in college, not before. These are bridges, not handouts. But the car and the credit are gone. No one moved. The hour wound down with no truce. No embraces. Only the clarity of what had been broken and what might, one day, be rebuilt. When they finally stood to leave, the binders remained on the table, heavy with proof, while I felt lighter than I had in years. The first days after the confrontation were strangely quiet. No constant buzz of requests, no late-night crises disguised as emergencies. I half expected the silence to crack open with a new demand, but instead, only echoes filled the space. On the third day, Verena posted on social media, "Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from blood." The comments were fewer than she'd hoped for, the sympathy shallow. By evening, the post had slipped into the endless scroll, and her storm fizzled before it ever reached me. Delphine called once, her voice measured. "Your sister is struggling," she said softly, as if it were my cue to swoop back in. I didn't take the bait. "What is Verena trying this week?" I asked instead. The question caught her off guard, and she quickly ended the call. Then, a different message. "Sable. Just one line. Got a job at the consignment shop." I stared at the words for a long time, weighing their simplicity. My reply was shorter still. "Proud of you." It felt like the first real exchange between us, unclouded by demands. Alone. I began noticing how much of my life had been shaped around proving something. The dinners, the clothes, the curated perfection of my apartment, all designed as evidence of worth to people determined not to see it. I canceled the order for a new designer bag I'd convinced myself I needed, then enrolled in a photography class at the community center instead. The quiet grew, but it wasn't emptiness. It was space. Finally mine. Sturdier than I remembered it could be. And as the weeks unfolded, that silence began to shift into something else. Signs that change, however small, was taking root. By the end of the month, the first cracks in their resistance began to show. Verena, no longer buffered by my transfers, took a second interview at a logistics firm. To my surprise, she got the job office coordinator with steady hours and benefits. She didn't call to announce it, but I heard through Delphine, whose voice carried more relief than complaint for once. Sable, too, started adapting. Without the car, she learned the bus routes and carpooled with classmates. Her texts became brief updates rather than barbs. Saving for school. Looking at in-state programs, dance departments that don't cost a fortune. It was practical in a way I'd never seen from her before. Even my mother shifted in small but noticeable ways. Our weekly calls no longer spun into recitations of Verena's struggles. Instead, she asked about my clients, my photography class, even the weather off the lake. Sometimes she slipped, but I redirected gently, and she followed. Then came the dinner. Just a simple meal at her house, roast chicken, salad, nothing extravagant. My friends weren't there, and there were no theatrics. We passed dishes, we ate, and for once the air wasn't heavy with tension. Afterward, Sable asked to speak with me outside. We stood in the small garden as twilight set in. She didn't stall or blame. "I need to apologize," she said quietly. "What I did was cruel. I was jealous, and I lashed out. I'm sorry." The words landed differently from anything she'd said before. I nodded. "I accept your apology. But trust isn't instant. It takes time to rebuild." She agreed, and for the first time in years, I believed she meant it. I walked back inside with her, knowing the real test was still to come. When my 35th birthday arrived, I chose quiet over spectacle. No reservations, no silk sheath, no grand gesture meant to prove anything. Just a home-cooked meal in my mother's kitchen, the camera from my photography class resting on the table beside the dishes. The room felt different this year. There was laughter, but it wasn't forced or bought. It wasn't measured by the size of the bill. Sable handed me a folded card she'd made herself, careful brushstrokes forming a bright design. Inside was $200, saved from her job at the shop. "It's not much," she said, "but I wanted to give back something." I held it with more reverence than any luxury gift I'd ever received. Verena's present was simple, a cookbook she'd chosen because I'd once mentioned wanting to cook more at home. It was modest, but thoughtful, and that was what mattered. When the time for toasts came, Delphine raised her glass. Her voice was steady, without the sharp edge of comparison. "To Calla," she said, "who showed us how strength and love can live together. I'm proud of the woman you've become." I sat in the warmth of that moment, realizing that boundaries hadn't destroyed us. They had given us the only chance to grow into something real. Back home later, I hung my coat and glanced at the car keys still on their hook. They weren't symbols of power anymore. They were proof that I finally drove my own life.